Sometimes there are movies that I really love and everyone else hates them. That's just a normal part of life. The more frustrating scenario is when I love a movie and everyone else thinks it's fine. Like, no one hates it and they might say it's not bad, but I feel like they're missing the true mastery on display. For me, this is movies like Arrival, First Man, and Emma. Movies that, based on the box office and Rotten Tomato scores, aren't hated by any stretch, but didn't make many people's top films of the decade like they did for me. This all came to the forefront of my mind when I went to see Wonka a few weeks ago. Wonka is a movie that by most accounts wasn't wanted at all. When I bring it up to people that haven't seen it yet, they mostly roll their eyes and complain about sequels, prequels, and franchise films. Ironically though, these are all people that shelled out $20 for every new Marvel movie over the last decade. And when I talk to people that have seen the film, they say it was a nice kids movie. I haven't talked to anyone yet that saw and hated the film, though I'm sure those people exist. Despite all that, I've watched it twice now and absolutely loved it. I think it's heartfelt and funny and exciting. So where's this disconnect coming from? Obviously, people are entitled to like whatever they want, but it feels like when I talk to people about these films, we're on a totally different page, and they aren't getting what I'm saying. So today, I'm going to try and clarify my thoughts a little bit. Before anything else, don't go into Wonka expecting it to feel like either of the previous two Willy Wonka films. While it pays homage in a few moments to the 1971 film, it's stylistically and tonally very different. A much better expectation going into the film is that it's pretty much Paddington 3. Paul King, the director of Wonka, also directed the first two Paddington movies, and you can clearly see the resemblance. In fact, moving forward, most of everything I say about Wonka also applies to the two Paddington films. One of the biggest problems is that people write this film off as a kids movie. To refute this criticism, I have to take a step back and look at what makes a kids movie in the first place, and why that description is a destructive one. So what makes a kids movie? Is it the lack of graphic content? I can think of lots of films without graphic content that most kids would find super boring. Is it the lack of intense or mature themes? Just watch any Pixar movie and tell me it doesn't have mature and intense themes. Is a kids movie always featuring children doing childish things? Well, that's not true. Is it movies that are bright and colorful? Would that make Avatar a kid movie? The problem with these markers is that I can think of exceptions to all of them. Now, maybe if a movie had all of these elements, you could definitively call it a kids movie and move on. But that's kind of the problem. Oftentimes, the designation of kids film is a criticism used to dismiss a film. Yes, you can take your children to see Wonka without the threat of graphic content, and you know the expressive acting and bright colors will keep your children engaged, but that's really selling the film short. So, if I wouldn't call Wonka or Paddington kids movies, then what would I call them? The answer to this lies in what director Paul King sourced as the inspiration of his films. The works of Frank Capra, such as It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. These aren't kids' movies, they're sincere and optimistic films. This all reminds me of what Thomas Flight said about the classic modernist take of Top Gun Maverick. In Paul King's films, the characters face hard challenges that they eventually overcome through determination, belief in their cause, and staying the correct course despite the obstacles. Say what you will about the state of optimism in modern culture and art, but I do think Paul King's commitment to sincerity is really unique. Most big-budget films, spurred on by the bathos of early Marvel films directed by Joss Whedon, are incapable of letting a heartfelt moment pay off. While watching Wonka, there were multiple moments when I expected there to be a joke to undermine the tension, but they didn't come. An experience I also had while watching Top Gun Maverick. There's something so refreshing about watching a film that isn't ashamed of itself. So, I've established that I find the sincerity and optimism of Wonka and Paddington to be unique and compelling compared to its contemporaries. But there's one final thing that makes it a masterpiece to me. In a video essay exploring the difference between American and British comedy, Now You See It talks about how, traditionally, British comedy was darker and less optimistic than American comedy. When you compare American remakes of British content like The Office, it's clear to see not only the more optimistic tone of the American version, but also the propensity to end much more happily. As someone that grew up watching British shows like Not the 9 O'Clock News and Blackadder, both of which also happen to star Rowan Atkinson. I really love the British approach to humor. The problem is that this British approach to comedy seems to be directly antithetical to the heartfelt optimism of the modernist films like It's a Wonderful Life and Top Gun Maverick. Wonka, while taking place in an undisclosed location, and Paddington both have very British sensibilities, but somehow still have the American modernist sincerity and optimism. This isn't to say that there aren't depressing American movies or optimistic British films, but I don't think anyone else has quite done it the way Paul King has. I think this combination is the key to their totally unique and interesting tone, but more than that, I think this is the source of confusion. People watching Paul King's films are either used to the cynical comedy of British films and shows, especially the work of many of the people featured in Wonka's cast, or the traditional American by-the-rules approach. When people see a film that blends the two so seamlessly, I think they're caught off guard by the tone and can't identify it, leading to it being called campy or childish. At the end of the day, you don't have to like Wonka. I didn't address some other issues people had with the film, like the supposed excess of CGI, because I think that deserves its own video. I love Wonka, and I love Paddington. I think that Paul King is bringing something to audiences that no one else is, and that's exciting.